Hello and welcome back to the channel. It's Mike from PowerSonic and Apprentice 121. Today we're going to be installing this Solax inverter and battery. I've been calling it a Solax. It's my stupid pronunciation of things. It is Solax, and there is some unique features in and around doing this. I made a few mistakes along the way. I correct them through the course of the video so you can all see what they are. Just these RCBOs from Proteus are bi-directional. So I'll pop a little picture of that in one of the corners showing it on the data sheet. But for those of you who asked on the last video about RCBOs and backfeeding them, so obviously when the inverter's pumping power back into the install, it's going through the RCBO in the wrong direction. If your cable route dictates you need RCD protection, it's going to be a factor. If the inverter dictates you need it, it's also going to be a factor. As I explained on this video, this inverter doesn't need it, the cable route doesn't need it, so we've not used it. But if it's a problem, Proteus is the brand you need to be looking at. And these are fantastic consumer units. Let's get to it. Okay, so we've got to move this consumer unit, which is currently in the middle of my converted garage wall. So this used to be a garage consumer unit, as per normal, in the middle of the wall in a very handy place. We subsequently converted this room, bit of a building site at the minute, but we're going to move the consumer unit into here. So you can see this is work in progress at the minute. All of this is coming out in the end. Obviously, we've got the solar stuff going in. So this is all going to be done away with at some stage and probably house a water tank. So we're clearing off this bit. This is all coming out. Got a bit of OBS up at the minute just to mount the board onto. We do have some lats that were already on the wall when this was converted. So these are cupboard doors covering all this up. Did have shelves in. It was a nice little space, but we knocked it out, opened it up to put the solar stuff in and move the consumer unit into. So obviously we've got to move our cables across from here over to here. Some were easier than others because we had the shed supply, which we've just rerouted the steel wire armour outside, and I'll show you that. Punches through down here, so we've just got these through loose for the minute. We're going to pop a bit of tray on the wall to neaten this up. We've got our 25mm submain coming through from the meter box outside. That comes up into this changeover switch that some of you may have spotted. We'll talk about that as we come to wire it up later on in this video, but it will allow us to run off grid, and there are some key considerations you need to make when you're going to do that. So we'll speak about that and the setup and how we ensure that is working safely later on. Got the board partially dressed away. We've got up the top here, so we've got the power circuits in the top, which is basically a radial socket circuit, a couple of ring circuits, and the oven circuit. Down on the bottom here, I'm going to put some lighting in. So we've got a couple of flexible cables in here, which were for some fancy outside lights we put in down the side of the house. They're going to go into a Sunseeker time controller. I'll show you that later on, but they'll basically track the sun without needing smart controls or a photocell outside and switch them on and off. So we've got those to dress in. We've got the three lighting cables down here, one for the smoke alarms, one for up and down lights. I've only used 1mm on this. I would normally use 1.5, but we're working off the existing wiring, which is 1mm at the other end. So we've got that to sort out as well. So for the minute, I'm going to dress all this up. Just to explain about the off-grid very briefly while we've got this here. So this is the shed supply. We've basically got the line and neutral which goes down to the shed, but for those of you who watched my earth rod testing series, you will know the shed is on an earth rod, so it doesn't have an earth connection down there. But this, we can make carry that earth rod back to the house. So we can take the earth rod that's at the shed and use that to feed down into this changeover switch. So when we're running off grid via the inverter, the solar panels and the battery, we have an earth connection separate from the supply network, and we're totally isolated from that when we're in essentially islanding mode. But we'll cover all of that when we get to it. I've dropped a little earth lead down there, so the 6mm that runs down into this changeover switch, and we can tie that in with this. Obviously it's all going to get idented up and labelled so they're properly sleeved, but just to show you what the plan is on that while we've got access to it. I know there's great big holes in the back of this as well. That's all going to be taken care of later on. This is work in progress. I'll show you in a second when it's buttoned up. These cables are just left on the top of the boiler for now because we need to take these in the ceiling void, as is always the case. Would have been lovely for the joists to be running this way, but they're not. They're running this way. We could lift the floor in the bedroom above, but there is fitted wardrobes up here that I don't especially want to move. So we're going to cut a slot out of the ceiling. We'll put it back. It'll make a bit of interesting content as well to show you how to do that. Sometimes you do this in a flat roof environment, so we'll imagine that's the case here. It's double boarded as well, because obviously this used to be a garage, so we've got that extra fun. We're going to cut a slot out, we'll patch it up afterwards, install a maintenance-free junction box in the void in the floor here, and we'll show you how we do that as well, and then pull back these circuits. I'll show you what's in there. There's not actually a great deal. It's a 4-bed detached house, but we are limited on circuit layout. It was done at a time when rings were common, so obviously the shed supply, that's coming back in to that cupboard. The EV charger is going to come back in there as well, so none of that really needs to be dragged across. We've got the sockets for this room, which is just one 2.5mm radial. Got the upstairs lights, the downstairs lights and smoke alarm. They've been put together for some reason, but they are run separately, so we're going to split them. And we've got the 2 socket rings and the cooker. So essentially you've got 5 2.5mm we need to drag across, 3 1mm and a 6mm, and that's it. As I say, we'll pop the bit out of here that we cut out, maintenance-free junction box. We'll mark on the distribution board and inside it as well that that is there, and hopefully that gives people a fighting chance of finding it should they ever need to. As always, if you are doing this, make sure you do bring the circuits back in rings still. Don't run a radial from here at the same rate into those points, because if you get a break in the ring, it's very difficult to test it if you've not continued it to your new location. So make sure you factor that in when you're doing it. I'll get on with this now. I'll jump back on and talk about it when it's all buttoned up. So I've dressed this board away just quickly. It isn't finished by a long shot, but it's got us a good start. Got my circuits in that I said we needed. So if we go up to the top, we've got the radial for this room. We've got the ring final circuit. We've got the cooker circuit, another ring final circuit. And then on this bottom row, we've got the 2 lighting circuits and the smoke alarm. Got the shed supply, the new solar hybrid inverters supply, and there's one in here ready to take the boiler feed, because we're going to remove that. That's coming down these 2 conduits here, so they're going to come out and we're going to stick it off the board into a switch view spare and mount it all up here for now. Changeover switch is wired. Said we'd explain that. Oh, just mention these while I am thinking of it, but these are the Hylec stuffing glands, if you're not familiar with them. They're really, really good if you're tight for space, so I've used them on the trunking over here because I wanted to change the arrangement. For those of you who watched the other video on the solar system, you would have seen we put the isolators between the trunking and the inverter. This time I've dressed them on the side, and we'll come to that a bit later on when we're talking about that. But yeah, these were really handy for that. You can fit them for one hand. I'll pop a little video in so you can see that going in and how it works. But really useful, not paid or sponsored. We've got these and I liked them. So what we talk about it. This is the Luden changeover switch, and you can see we've got the 3 positions. We've got position 0, position 1 and position 2. Really straightforward to wire up. You can see here it gives you the numbered positions. So this is for 3-phase, but you can use it as a single phase application, as I have here. So you've got your mains in, which is on 1, 5, 9 and 13. We have a row of pins in here. We'll open it up and have a look later on just to show you visually, but you basically put your feed in from the grid, and that would go in those 1, 5 and 9 terminals. And then your generator, which in this case is the solar system, that goes into pins 3, 7 and 11. So this is our generator cable coming in here, and that connects in on the other side of this switch. And then you've obviously got your load, which is the consumer unit with all of the electrical equipment connected to it. And then if you swing it over to position 1, it's in essence going to run from the grid. In position 0, everything is off. There's no connection from the generation or the grid to the load. So if you want to isolate this board to do anything, you've got a really handy local point to do it. And then position 2 is when you want to go to island mode, and that's where you disconnect from the grid, both the live conductors and the earthing system, and you run from just the earth rod and the inverter supplying your power. Really important you do that. You can see down the back of this cable we've got that earth there, and as I mentioned on the shed supply, we've got the line and neutral from that, and then the earth that comes back from that is connected into the earth feed running down to here. So the earth rod in essence is alongside that grid supply. But yeah, that's where we're up to. I'll leave it there for now. When we've made a bit of progress, we'll come back to it. See, the guys are going to have to cut out a slot in the ceiling here. I'm away on a course on Monday, and they're working for me doing this. So they've got to get the cables over from here through the ceiling void to over here, as we said. And they're going to put me a bit of tray on here as well, just to get these cables more nicely dressed away and wire in the EV charge point outside. Oh, a little bit of good news. Obviously, we moved into this house, it's about 20 years old, and we've lived here now 13, 14 years, I think. And it's always had a bond on the water. But age-old thing they used to do back in the day, we've got a plastic water main in there. I've had to dig the insulation out from in here to just double check that. So we'll pop that back, and then it's just a bit of copper pipe that the bond's on. It's exactly the same with the gas as well. It's plastic pipe leading up to the service head. I'll show you that outside. And then it comes in metal, so copper. And it's bonded again out in the meter cabinet with a little bit of copper pipe that feeds from the meter into the house. But obviously there's no potential there because it's a plastic pipe feeding the meter. So we can disconnect those bonds, which is great news because now we don't have to mess about with any of that, getting it into here. So that was a Brucey bonus. And yeah, we'll pick up with you when we've got a bit further on. I'll run through exactly what we've done with this when we've got that finished and buttoned up. Showed it on the last video, setting it up. Really simple process. So if you want to go and check that out, there's a Solax inverter and battery storage system getting wired a video or two ago. But I'll show this when it's finished and have a quick talk through what we've done and why we've done it. Catch up with you in a bit. As you can see, that's the consumer unit there, and I've opened up this ceiling void now, and we've got a little hatch hole inside this cupboard here as well. Lots of the cables do run straight along that edge, obviously no regard to building regs and putting holes through joists when this place was built in 2001. They're a little bit out of what we would have as our zones of 25% and 40%, but here and there, the holes are in place now so we can make use of them. These circuits are largely going to be drawn back, and we'll join them in a maintenance-free junction box that will mount maybe up here. And then we've got 4 cables which we'll have to draw back through these holes in the other direction to join with another maintenance-free junction box inside that access point for the upstairs ring final circuit, one of the legs, upstairs lights, downstairs lights, and the power for this room. And obviously they'll be marked in the consumer unit where they are. They'll be fastened to the joists in the Wago boxes that are appropriate for the maintenance-free value, and we'll show you all that when we've done it anyway. Actually, we might not, because I'm on a course this week and Matty's coming to finish this off, and he'll probably put the ceiling back. I'll get him to take some pictures. Yeah, and that's where we are now. So we've got the switch fuse outside, I'll show you a bit of that as well. This will all be wired in and powered when I'm next back. I'll get some footage of that too, and catch up with you where we are. Once this is finished, I'll show you patching and filling it as well, and hopefully it disappears and it's like we never did it. So we've got the board dressed in now. You'll hear my inverters beeping away. We had a bit of a power cut in the area yesterday, day before, so we got this brought to life so we could run the house a little bit. So it is now synced to the grid and thinking it's waiting to discharge energy. Obviously we've got all the isolators in the off position, changeover switch is off, isolate from the inverter is off. All the electrical energy is killed off to this point to safely work on it. We've got our SPD main switch, SPD, MCB. We've got a row of RCBOs there for some sockets and the cooker up at the top. Down at the bottom here we've got an MCB for the inverter. Speak about that later on. We've got the RCBO for the EV charge point. We've got some lighting RCBOs, the shed supply, and then a little feed here that powers this Shelly device. It's a 20 amp RCBO because that's all I had left, but we'll get that swapped to a 6 amp because it doesn't really need the 20. And we've got some outside lights wired in off this. So the basic principle is you take a line feed in to power the Shelly on the top, also a line into the bottom of this, which loops across on the switched outputs that you want. You can put switches in line with this. If you want to bring your switch feeds back to your consumer unit or your enclosure, you can bring them straight into this. But obviously we just want power in. And then this is going to switch and fire out the live to the 2 outside lights, and we'll set all that up later on as well. You can see Matty's been busy. We've got some chunking up across the top. That all needs tidying away still. We've got our temporary steel wire armour in, running up to here. So that's bringing our EV charge point, our, what else we got there? EV charge point shed and the main feed in. They come up. So the main feed, the grid connection, is going into the changeover switch. We've got another connection out there, which is the ESP feed from the inverter, and then the load side going up into the consumer unit. I'll show you outside in the meter cabinet as well. Still not finished here. We've got a cable here which is for an emergency light. I'm going to put up here as well once I've put some board across and tidied it all up a bit. Over this side we've got the battery now on. I've popped the trunking lid on, but we've still got to bring the DC cables down through the loft, and I'll show you all that when we get to that stage. These 2 AC isolators, I've done it because it shows it on the MCS drawing, but I think having looked into it, it's for if the inverter is remote from the consumer unit, so you're in a separate room. That's just something that's probably not going to be needed, but I'm going to wait and ask the MCS inspector if we need to do that or not. Same for the generation meter. I know that's still in there, but essentially they don't really do anything with the new smart meters that go in. With this one, like I said, no isolators underneath. Got rid of that idea, put them down the side here. That's just in case there's ever an issue with any of this lot, you can still get to them. They're right in front of your face. It's not quite as obvious in that orientation, I don't think, as to what they're controlling, so we'll make sure our labelling is spot on this. SPD down there, still all needs a neaten up. I've patched the ceiling, so I don't know if I showed you doing this. The old consumer unit was there, such a shame. But we've now got a bit of wall, which is way more boring, but that's what we wanted apparently. And then this has just had a first fill. That's going to need sanding back and then a top skim over just to tidy it all up. Same in the cupboard where we had the access hole. That's all been filled ready, so we've got no penetrations left. When we get to the next stage, this is all coming out. As I said, the boiler, the pipe work, it's all a bit scruffy. So we've just popped a temporary bit of tray in over the top and stuck our CU on this OSB for now. Because when this all comes out, we're going to have a jig around again, and these are all going to move back onto this wall. So we're going to have our consumer unit over here. Then all the cables are coming straight up from outside into it. And obviously all our cables coming into here come from that way along as well, so they can just drop down straight into it. It's all in the plan, and then we're going to have a tank over this side, and all the pipe work's going to be redone to drop straight down into that in this corner, and then we can pipe into it, give the plumber a bit of space in here. I'm having to do this in a zoomed in orientation because the torch doesn't work when I zoom right out to wide angle, so apologies for that. But just to show you, we'll get the lights on and the board covers back on, and I'll show you all this powered up and in the next stage. So this is down the side of the property. You'll see we've got our steel wire armors here. So we've got the zappy, the shed, and the main 25mm feed coming into our new board. This is all going to have a nice bit of tray put on it, but we're waiting for these pipes to be moved. As I said, all the pipe work inside is coming out. We're getting rid of the boiler. So once that's gone, we can tidy all this up. But for now, absolutely fine. Dug into this little gravel verge, if you like, all the way across. We've still got our earth bond on here, but this is a plastic supply into the gas box. As I showed earlier, we've got the plastic water pipe as well coming in. Matt has just repurposed this earth block because he didn't want to break the seals on the meter, quite rightly, to be able to wire into the earth block in here. So when we have this swapped for a smart meter, we'll get that done at that stage. We've gone for the Proteus switch fuse because they're really roomy. For those of you who tried to get 25mm steel wire armors into meter cabinets and into switch fuses, you will know the pain of that, which is why often on some of these new builds you find there has been attempts at using temper clamps and whatnot just to go into Henleys rather than doing it through a switch fuse, because it can be a pain in the backside. This allows lots of room. I have cleared this with Northern Power Grid. They're happy for us to have done it in this way. As you can see, it still leaves them ample room to get the 3-phase meter in. There's still plenty of room for the head. There's a little bit of space under here as well if someone ever did want to use it. But we're happy with that. They're happy with that, so we're all good. Zappy's on the wall and happily waiting for the electric vans to still be delivered. So we're still waiting on those. But that's powered. I'll show you inside what we've come up with as the finished product, and we'll run through everything in there in a minute. Note the paint. We have progress. The ceiling has been patched and first coated with emulsion. I'm going to have to redo the whole ceiling because it's a different shade, but I wanted to get a covering of paint on so you can see any lumps, bumps and little dints to get some more filler in, for want of a better phrase. So I can see all of that now. We can give it a little sand back where it's needed, pop a bit more filler in, get a really nice finish up there. The consumer unit that was here, that has totally vanished. We've still got a seam in the plasterboard that's been there since the garage was converted, so that's nothing to do with us. But otherwise, completely vanished. You'd never know it had ever been there. I don't know what's coming up on camera with the paint still drying, but it is a really good finish. Happy with that. Inside the cupboard, there has been a few changes from when we last spoke. I'll just open these other doors so we can get some light in and then we'll run through it. It was in the corner, and I explained why I wanted to do it in this corner, and then I realised when I was digging into the manual of this bad boy that it needs 300mm all around it for ventilation. So that was a stupid idea. So that's all been moved across, and we've now got the battery here. It has opened up a bit of space in this corner, so I'm going to put some corner shelves in where I can to again make sure we keep that ventilation distance. But for a bit of storage, we'll try and make the best use of the space we can. These are pre-manufactured fixings from the Centaur trunking, so they're not the clip over cover caps. They have some internal fitments. I think it's so it can maintain an IP rating, so we've gone with that. That's come up okay. And all the excess cabling on these ones, the last ones you'll have seen me done, I left the loops. This one we've brought them straight up and in, just to show you that they're not under pressure, but there is excess cabling in the trunking, so we've hidden it away in there, just looped it through and round. So if we do need to make any changes, there is some length on all of that. We've got the SPDs from Surge Protection Devices down in here. There's the two again, one for each string. Matthew's called them the West and the South string. Very posh. We've got our glands for the battery on the back there. And we've also got our DC isolators again for the West string, and that will be labelled as the South string. We've just got the one AC isolator. As we've moved it over, it seemed even more ridiculous than it already was. I don't know if I showed it in the video, I might have done, but we did have another AC isolator here when the inverter lived there. It seemed pointless to have one stacked above the other, just ridiculous. So we'll come for just the one. It isolates going each direction, I guess. If you make an isolation to work on the consumer unit or you want to work on the inverter, does the same thing. That's in there. If we swing around this side, you get a better view of the changeover switch. This cable here is going to be for a light in the cupboard. It's up there, look, poking through. So we're ready to go with that one. We've got the nest just temporarily put up onto this board, as I said. Consumer unit still needs labelling, but we're up and in there. I'm going to make another addition to this, and we'll talk about the reason why in a minute. That's the Shelly, so that's doing some outside lights. It's an app for that, so you can program it, set timers, all the rest of it, but ultimately you can also control it from this as well. Brilliant product, and that helps you with some smart functionality at a relatively low cost. Got the tray working. You can't see it because someone's filled the cupboard back up with junk, but that kind of runs up and across. And as I said, once all this pipe comes out, because it's all coming out, that's all coming out, we can tidy that up and make a neater job of it, but for now, it serves its purpose. So we have our connection coming in from the grid. That wires into this changeover switch. We have our connection coming in EPS mode from the inverter into the changeover switch. And we have our load going up to the consumer unit from the changeover switch. I wanted to try it and run the whole board. Obviously this is limited in its output, so we need to be realistic in what can actually be used in EPS mode. But I wanted the option of having circuits powered all around the property. Obviously we need to be careful with what we're doing. Now I did make a user error with this and I'll speak about it in just a second. Okay, so when we drop the power on this, if we swing this to position 0, I won't do it because the kids are playing on Xboxes and other bits and pieces while I've got some quiet to come and do this. Don't want to swing that, otherwise they'll start coming knocking on the door, internet's gone off. But if you put that in position 0, this will start beeping, says the power's out, and it will then send power through the EPS cable and back through ultimately to this changeover switch. We move to position 2 and it restores power into the board. All of the circuits in the house start working again, running off the EPS, but it also powers the inverter MCB in here. So this one is now powered from an MCB, as I showed you on the footage earlier, and it runs back into the inverter. So it sees the power restored and it thinks, happy days, grid's come back, turn the EPS off. Power goes off again, back through here. Power's off, EPS mode, repower the board. And like a boot loop of the power going on and off every 2 or 3 seconds. The way to stop that is to put the isolator for the inverter into the off position. Then when you go into EPS mode, so you're in position 2 off grid, it then puts power back into the board. It will still power all the breakers and whatnot, but it can't get back through to the inverter, so it'll stay running in EPS mode. And it can't then back feed into the grid in a dangerous manner for someone working on it, because it's in position 2 there. We're separated from the earthing. We've got our earth electrode down at the shed I spoke about, and for those of you who've watched the channel before, you'll have seen all of that. And if we was to move it back into position 1, while that was still in the off position, the EPS mode wouldn't keep active in the way to damage anything, because it's just sat on position 2 of the changeover switch, essentially going nowhere. We then reboot the inverter's power, it sees it restored and turns off the EPS mode. I'm going to add a contactor in that takes care of that. So when it sees the power drop out, because we've gone to position 2 on here, it will also pop a voltage or a lack of a voltage on the contactor and open it, so it can't then put power through to the inverter until it sees the power restored back into the changeover switch. I think that will work. So I've got a contactor on order. I'll show it all when it's wired up, but it just saves operating this. Obviously it's under manual control. If you end up in that boot loop, someone's going to start complaining because the power's going on and off. Obviously a potential to damage electronics. They don't like things like that, but they'll come and turn that switch off, solve that problem, and you kind of do it. But thinking of other consumers and customers, I wanted a way where it's taken care of automatically. And normally I wouldn't set this up in someone's property for EPS to run an entire board anyway. You'd have a few separate circuits, downstairs sockets, upstairs lights or something, and just look after those for them when there's a power cut. I hope that makes sense. Just to cover off a few other bits about this as well. So this is on a 40 amp MCB. In the Solax manual, we'll have a look at that in a minute. It talks about a 50 amp circuit for the inverter, but then it also mentions how it requires a 40 amp circuit later on in the instructions. I've spoke to Solax. The 50 amp figure is combined in EPS mode and in normal operation. It's like its total overall current capability, I guess, rather than what it can ever actually be producing in terms of an AC draw. And it's just a figure that's in there because of that. When it's working in a grid connected capacity or an EPS connected capacity, whichever way around it is, it's only ever going to be pulling 40 amps at maximum. So that's why it needs a 40 amp circuit. And I'll pop a few pictures up somewhere if I can find them in one of these top corners for you to have a little look at that yourselves if you want to pause the video now. And you can see it, or a link in the description to the Solax manual so you can check that out too. So I hope you found that an interesting video. I've tried to run through it in as much detail as I can. If you've got any other questions around these Solax inverters, please do let me know, and I'll try and answer them in the comments as always. This is now waiting the solar panels going on the roof, so it is here and working. We had a series of power cuts the other day, so getting the battery online was very useful indeed. We was able to get some of the power restored, and yeah, it was nice to see that function actually. This is the 5.8 kilowatt XXX battery. That is the 7.5 kilowatt Solax inverter, and it is set up to work in an EPS mode. Once we've got the strings on the roof and the panels all wired on Matthew's very poshly worded west and south strings, are in my terminology the back roof and the side roof. We'll show it finished up later on. Obviously this board all needs wiring, labelling as well. I think I've shown the insides, and these need swapping for DIN rail blanks. I realise they're just clip-ins, But that's all I had in the van. I'd forgot to order some, so they've gone in there just so no one can shove their hands in it in the meantime. I'll show all that finished off. The Shelly, you can control it from the front screen, so if you just drop down you can turn these on. So in doing that, I've now popped those two outside lights on. See, one of them's drawing 9.3 watts, one of them a couple of watts, which makes sense because one's a little bulkhead down the side and the other one is a barrel light at the front with some 5 watt GU10 lamps in. So yeah, that's interesting. And we've got them set on the app basically to come on dusk till dawn. Luden changeover switch, best value one I could find at the time of ordering. I think it was a couple of £100 nearly. And basically you wire in, there's 4 separate terminals in it. Wherever you wire, basically your grid connection and your EPS can never be connected together. That's ultimately what it's doing, and that's for the earth-in and your live conductors. I hope you found that interesting. Sorry if it's been a bit of a long one. I've tried to include as much in there as I can. As I said, there's links in the description for anyone who wants to go off and read into the Solax stuff. I'm learning more about it with every install. We're going to be using these a lot more in the future. We've already had loads of jobs get booked in. I've got another 3 or 4 domestic systems similar to this in the diary already. We've had talks with a big local stately home very near to us who want some fields and barns potentially covering in solar panels. So it's got very exciting very quickly, and I'm hoping to share lots of that on the channel soon. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.